In this video, I'm going over the terminal on Ubuntu Touch. While this is a basic overview and tutorial, you might find some neat tips and tricks, especially at the end. So stick around or scrub through the timestamps to see if there's something interesting. The Ubuntu Touch terminal, or the terminal on any Linux system, allows for efficient command entry through the command line and is low on resources, so makes it quite quick and convenient when you know how to use it. However, the terminal is not ideal for some functions, particularly on a mobile device. Let's look at the terminal app on Ubuntu Touch. Here it's called Terminal. On some other systems, the same kind of application is called the console or the command line. We can open it simply by tapping on it, and it does ask for your user password. This is because there are things that can be done within the user directory which allow you to create and delete files directly from the command line. Right now we are in the user's home directory and we have full read and write access to this directory. However, on Ubuntu Touch, the system does not have write access. So if we go to the root directory, as shown here, we won't be able to modify anything without making the system writable. It's not advised to do this on Ubuntu Touch because it will break system updates. But if you need to do that, the command is listed in the comments below, assuming you know what you're doing. But as this is a very basic tutorial, we won't be going over that. Now let's look at some of the app features. Here we have tabs. You can open new tabs just in case you want to do different things in different windows of a terminal. You can close these tabs simply by pressing the X. So it's quite convenient, but also if you are in the middle of something, beware. The settings for the app are mostly cosmetic, but you'll notice there are some other special layouts listed below, which we'll talk about later. And here you can see some hotkeys that are also useful when using the terminal. Long pressing on the screen will give you the option to open a new tab or split the screen. You can split it horizontally, as shown here, which is nice in the mobile interface. This allows you to run two commands simultaneously while being able to see them both. You can open a new tab as per the menu above, and you can close the current window, which is the one that you are pressing on. Again, you can split horizontally, long press, close the window. You can also split it vertically, which isn't that great on mobile, but if you put it in landscape mode, I guess that's how you might use it. Sometimes the keyboard disappears, and in order to bring that back, you just press that keyboard icon in the bottom right. Swiping down often also makes the keyboard go away. Now you'll see at the top there are these quick command keys with the control function. On a normal terminal, you would press control and that key, but since you can't really do that on Ubuntu Touch, they are built into this special menu here. So we have a few different options. We can use the scroll keys. There are commands built right in, which are regular terminal commands, such as clear, which will clear the screen. You can also access the function keys, And then there are special commands for the nano text editor, which we'll get into later. So let's go back to the control commands and go through them. If you know how to use these commands, it will make using the terminal a little bit quicker or convenient when necessary. So if I type something into the command line and I press Ctrl A, it will go to the front of that command, the beginning of the line. There is another command like that that goes to the end, however it's not in this menu for some reason. But on Ubuntu Touch, if you long press on the spacebar, it will get you to where you can move the cursor manually. And then I can edit the command as such. The Ctrl R command is a search function where you can search previously entered commands. So simply by typing the beginning of a command, it'll give you the most recent version of that command that was run. Using the up and down arrows in the terminal will scroll through previous commands, forward and back. On Ubuntu Touch, you can also swipe up and down on the terminal to scroll through these commands. The Ctrl L command works like the clear command. So if you type clear into the terminal, it will clear the screen so that it looks cleaner and you can start over with your next command. Pressing Ctrl L here does the same function. Now for some basic commands in the terminal. The first command is pwd. While I thought sometimes that might stand for password, it stands for print working directory. It tells you exactly which directory you are in at that moment. This can be useful when you are trying to copy or move files to another location, or to navigate through the directory system. The next command is ls. ls is short for list. Simply inputting that into the terminal will list all the items and files in the current directory. You can see the directories are in blue, and files, depending on the type of file, will have a white or another color. You can also use the list command on a specific directory location. Here I'm listing all the binary files in the user binary bin directory. As you can see, they're green, and these are actually all the commands that you can run as this user in the terminal. However, you might notice there is a large list of files and it exceeds the size of the screen. This happens often. In order to scroll through this large list, we can use the pipe command, which is that vertical line in between and adding less. This combines these two commands, list and less, and we'll see what it does here. So it pauses as it starts to list, and now we can use this less command to navigate through the list a little bit more freely according to our needs. Pressing J or K will scroll up and down through the list. You can also use your finger to scroll up and down, also scrolling left and right, depending if the file name is longer and you want to see it. We can also use the page up and page down keys to move further, one page at a time, as we scroll through this list. Pressing G will go to the top of the list, while pressing A capital G or Shift G will go to the end of the list. Now, as mentioned before, it's important to quit these commands appropriately, so you could press Ctrl C, which basically closes that command, but a lot of commands have built-in functions, like I said, and here if we press Q so that the command shuts down properly. Now let's do Ctrl L to clear the screen again, and we can move on to the next command. Here I'll type list to see what's in my home directory, but we are going to be changing directories using the cd command. So typing cd, you can change directory to whatever directory you want to type in next. Since you are in the home directory, you can type in documents, but note these are case sensitive, so typing documents with lowercase will not work. We have to do an uppercase D in order to get to that directory. So now we are in the documents directory. If we type pwd, it prints the full working directory. We can also list what's in the directory and see that there is a text file that was created previously. To go backwards one level, type cd space ... Another key feature in the terminal is the ability to use the tab key, but as you can see, there is no tab key on the keyboard. It's useful for completing file names and commands without having to type it out completely. Here we can just tap the screen and it will complete the command. If there are other directories or files with similar file names, it will list all of the file names according to what you have typed in so far. You can create files using the touch command. This allows you to create any file type or file name simply by typing in touch and then the file that you want to create. Here I'm going to create another text file, so I type touch space note1.txt. Now if I list the files in this directory, I can see that I've created another note file. Next, if I want to copy files, I can use the cp command. So if I type cp and my note file name, again using the tab autocomplete by tapping on the screen, then I type in where I want the note to be copied to. In this case, I've copied it to note 2, which makes a copy with a new name. So I've essentially copied the same file into the same directory, but with a different name. I can also copy it to a different directory. So if I type cp, my file name, and then specify the directory, ... / it'll copy it one directory backwards. So if we go back to that directory, cd ... and list the files, now we can see I've copied note 2 to my original home directory. So both files still exist, the one in documents and the one in the home directory. This is different from the move command, which is essentially moving the file so it won't exist in its original location. But you can also move files in order to rename them. So if I want to rename this document to note 3, I can move using mv note 2 to note 3, and now I've moved that file or renamed it to note 3. just like the copy command, you can also move a file to a different directory. So I can here move Note 3 to Downloads. And now it's no longer in the home directory, but it is now in the Downloads directory, which we can see here. Now to remove or delete a file, we type the rm command. So rm and the file name will remove that file completely, and it is gone after you've done that. So if we list the files in downloads, we see that the note has been deleted. While rm works for single files, if you want to delete an entire directory, you can also use the same command, but if the directory is not empty, you'll have to add a special flag. We'll talk about that later. So let's first make a directory using the make directory command, mkdir, and we can create a directory called notes in our home file. So now we can see the directory, which show up in blue on Ubuntu Touch. And if we go to our documents directory, we can see a bunch of notes, which we can then move to our notes directory using mv. And here I'm using the star, which will use all the files in that directory and moving them to notes. So let's see what's in the notes directory. Now we have all our files. Now if we want to remove this directory and we type in the rm command, it says we cannot remove it because it's a directory. So what we need to do is rm-r to remove all of those files along with the directory, and then notes. And now there's no error. Listing the files in the home directory again, we can see our notes directory is gone, along with all those notes that we moved in there. So while these commands are quite powerful, it's important to know what you're doing because there's no undo in this case. Now let's go back to downloads and use this wget command. This gets files from the web in a sort of download fashion. So if you type wget and any file location on the web, it will download that file into the current directory. Here I'm using wget and a website address. That will download the index.html file that loads on the home page. So wget.github.com will download not the entire GitHub website, but just that first file that loads, which is called index.html. So if we list our files in downloads, we can now see that index.html has been downloaded using this wget command. Another useful command to use is cat, which is short for catenate, which will list the contents of a specific file, particularly a text file. So here we can use cat on the index.html file and show you the contents of that file chained together right in the terminal. Now again, this is useful if you quickly want to see what's inside of a file, but not very useful to list all of these contents in the terminal display. So instead we can use Nano, which is a text editor that comes with the GNU/Linux terminal system. So Nano, we can now browse and edit this text file, or HTML file in our case. And Nano has a bunch of special commands using the control button. So to get around this, Ubuntu Touch has built in this Nano menu. So Control C, Control D, Control R, etc. to help you navigate, save files, and work with a text editor on mobile. So if we add our edits to this file, then we want to save it and make sure that it's still in the file. So if we exit, it'll ask us to save the buffer, and we can, by default, we can save it to the same file name, or we can rename the file if we want. So now if I open the file again, it should have saved my changes, and we can see that it is there, in fact. Hi there. If we haven't made any changes, the Control X or exit command in Nano will simply close the file. There are a few other control commands, but we won't go over it as it's beyond the scope of this video. One final thing that we'll go over in the Ubuntu Touch terminal, or terminals in general, is the secure shell command. This is known also as SSH. This will allow you to connect to a remote computer that's running a secure shell server, or SSH server. So what this means is you can connect over the internet and access that remote terminal and run commands on it from your local device. But before we jump right into it, I want to go over a few more useful commands that work in conjunction with this next demonstration. The history command shows us previously run commands, and we can scroll up and down to go through each command. Or if I type history pipe grep and then SSH, it will print out all of those instances in the history where SSH appeared. Grep or grep stands for Global Regular Expression Print. So it prints out all of those expressions that contain the following string that you've put in there. And now we can see where I have already used these SSH commands, and then I don't have to type it out again when I want to connect to the previous server I was connecting to. So now we're going to get into the SSH shell, and instead of typing it out, like I said, I can use the bash or exclamation and the command number, and then I can run that same command right there. When you connect to an SSH server, it'll ask you for the user's password generally. So that test is the username, and then I enter the password. And now I'm connected to a remote server, and I'm able to use terminal commands on that remote system right from my mobile device. Again, our first command, pwd, we see we are in the home directory of the test user. Listing files, we can see what's on that remote computer. Here, there's already a note file, and let's see what's in it using cat notes. Very important stuff. Now to get out or disconnect from that remote connection, you type exit, as you would with any other terminal. But now you can see I'm back in my local terminal on Ubuntu Touch. And I can again reconnect to the remote server if I want to. Next, I want to talk about the screen command. This is something you have to usually install as an extra add-on, but I've already installed it on this remote computer, and now I can enable it so that I can work remotely and keep open a separate screen, if you will, so that even if I disconnect from the server, it'll still be running on that remote system. When I go into screen, let's say I'm working on a file or coding something, adding some very important changes, and I want to come back to it later, or I'm worried about the connection dropping, then screen becomes very important. So again, if I'm using Nano, I can make my edits to a file, and then I'm going to stop the Nano application, essentially exiting it, though it will then be running in the background. So here, I can't just do the Control-Z or Control-Z to stop it. So going back to the Nano menu, I do the Control-T, which says now execute a command, and then I go back to my control commands. This is a bit of a workaround on Ubuntu Touch. And then if I do Control-Z, it will stop the app. It's now running in the background as that first command there. So to get back to the app, I type FG, which stands for foreground, to bring it forward. And you can type the number of that app, and here it is now brought back to the foreground. And I can continue editing it. But note, this does not actually quit the file. So there are still things running through the buffers. So again, Control-T to type a terminal command, Control-Z. And with that in the background, now I can list the jobs running in the background using jobs. I can also run the top command, which is the table of processes, and I can stop that one with Control-Z. So now I have two jobs running in the background, Nano and top, and if I type screen-D to detach from the screen, but it's still running. So you can imagine it's like a different monitor that's still on with the application over there, and I've now switched to a different monitor that I'm looking at. So screen is still running remotely, but I have exited or disconnected from that secure shell, and we would think that everything's gone now. All that work I was working on, what happened to it? But if I SSH back to the remote system, type screen-R to reconnect, I can see that it is left just as I left it in that previous terminal session. So I can type again foreground, bring that file back to the foreground, and everything is left just as it was. So this is a little bit of a more advanced use of the terminal and secure shells, but you can do it from Ubuntu Touch as you would from any other Linux system. And I thought it was a neat little trick. Hopefully you learned something from this video. If you have any questions about the terminal or Ubuntu Touch in general, please feel free to comment below. Lastly, I'll comment that any changes made in the terminal are actually reflected on the Ubuntu Touch graphical user system as well. So if we go through our file explorer, we'll see that these files we've downloaded or deleted are actually reflected on the entire system. So that's a quick look at the terminal on Ubuntu Touch. It has some very powerful features, and it is to be used with care. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.